Hello, friends and fiends. Today, I interview Lake Hurwitz, and my first impression is that I am impressed. In a span of a couple of years, Lake went from freelance card artist to principal concept artist to principal visual development artist for Wizards of the Coast. Do you know what I did in the span of a couple of years? Me neither, as I was adhering to a schedule of napping, sleeping, and passing out. But enough about me. Let's hear about Lake. Spoiler alert, some cool stuff is about to be heard.
Oh, there you are.
All right. You can see my eye?
I can see you. Wow, you have a great camera. I'm jealous. What do you use?
I'm using like an actual camera. It's a micro four thirds like professional camera. I just have it hooked up here.
Oh my God! I just got shown up hardcore. Like you look amazing. I need to figure out a way to look better. It's a disaster the way that I look now compared to your image quality.
Appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah, no, it's great. Okay, well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Yeah, glad to be here.
So would you like to sort of introduce yourself and your current position at Wizards of the Coast?
Yeah, sure. I'm Lake Hurwitz, and I'm currently working as the principal visual development artist on the Wizards franchise development team.
So what is that? What does that mean?
So the franchise development team, while Wizards is known for making amazing games, our team actually works to make sure that our impact goes beyond the games. We prepare the materials for use in other media, like the upcoming D&D movie and the Netflix series.
Okay, so you prepare the use of it. So like for in a layman's term, for somebody who's dumb like me, what does that mean?
Well, I guess the easiest analogy to draw is like you've seen Marvel take comics and turn them into movies. Mm-hmm. We're essentially doing the same thing with Magic's game franchises or Wizards game franchises. Because there's been a long history of Wizards properties being turned into comics and books and the occasional film. But until recently, that was handled by the individual studios, and Wizards has grown large enough that we have a team that's handling that now.
Wow. So like that means there's more autonomy, right?
A lot more. Yeah. And that's a good thing because it means that the studios can work with their storylines the way that they need to, just like the comics can work with their storylines the way they need to. And we can work in separate universes or the same universes. And that kind of cross-team communication allows us to really make each expression the best, whether it aligns to the canon or not.
Right, that's because that's a problem with a lot of other studios, that when rights are sort of like divided, there's all this argument and sort of infighting on what the canon is and what it isn't, and so that's probably, I mean, it sounds wonderful that you guys are able to keep it all under one roof.
The way that I've seen it is that Wizards has been very culturally relevant and is only growing that way because of the popularity of Dungeons and Dragons and Magic, and they're both legacy products now. I believe D&D's nearing 50 years, and
that's insane.
Magic hit 25 not too long ago. And so between them, the cultural impact is just perfectly right to make that kind of jump to broader media impact.
Yeah.
We're here to kind of shepherd that forward and make sure that we get all of our best efforts lined up.
So what was the first position, or what was the first thing that obviously you got involved as an artist starting out, but what was your first sort of like step outside of doing the art for Wizards? Because you have several accolades to your name.
Can you be more specific? Are you talking about like if I'm playing games? Or are you talking about?
Well, I mean, I guess because you did freelance and then you were a senior concept artist, right? And then so like I was kind of curious what those were as well, and sort of the evolution of where you came as far as starting at Wizards to where you are today.
Got it. Well, I've been a concept artist and illustrator by trade since about 2010. And a lot of the people I went to school with, I went to a very small technical school, and many of my classmates became like top tier Magic artists. And so all the people I knew were already doing it. Yeah, so I was introduced to the Magic art director, Don Murrin, back in 2014 by another Magic artist, John Brassel. And I'd worked for them freelance in between then and about 2017. And in 2017, I've been a concept artist by trade that whole time. I've worked on film projects, games, tabletop, all kinds of stuff. And the world building team was just spinning up to do the Guilds of Ravnica set, and for a concept push. And I happened to be local, and I knew all of those people already. One of the artists actually got injured and couldn't make it to the concept push, and they needed to come in and fill in. And I happened to have a clear enough schedule at that time that I was able to take it on. And then from there, over the next several years, I built a strong working relationship doing visual development and concept art for those teams.
Awesome. Yeah. So you did a concept push for what I guess it was the guilds was called Spaghetti. That was the code name for it.
Yeah.
And so what is a concept push? Like, take me through the process. I'm curious about how that goes down, because it's the behind the scenes stuff that fascinates me.
Yeah. So I'm sure you've heard this from other artists that have worked on the game, but whenever a new set is going to be developed, it would be a nightmare trying to ensure consistency between all of the artists if you were just kind of trying to do it pell-mell. So there's a strong strategy in place, and that revolves around the creation of a world guide. Every artist who works on the set, and every writer, I believe, too, gets a copy of the world guide, and that's filled with art from previous editions that visited the plane, if it's an old plane, flavor text examples, story descriptions, all of the narrative beats, setting, characters, all of that is contained in there, but in very kind of sketchy form. And so the concept push is a roughly 3-week period during which Wizards hires either a bunch of disparate all-star talent, or more recently, because of COVID, it's been more like who's available.
Right.
To spend about 3 weeks just jamming and filling that world guide up with as much stuff as they can based on what's been written and designed so far.
And so, like, when you did the concept push, I guess obviously it was successful enough that you were brought to be a senior concept artist within the span of a year. And so what does the senior concept artist do then?
So that's actually an interesting distinction, because I was already working as a senior concept artist just for other places. And there's not really a title for any of the artists that work on concept pushes. They're all just concept artists. So really the different levels of concept artists are related to how much oversight they require and how much autonomy you can have. So right now I'm a principal. The difference between junior and regular concept artists and senior concept artists is usually like, how much guidance do you need from an art director to be able to deliver top quality content? And then going up from senior to either lead or principal or art director basically is dependent on how much management you take on. And also, in my case, I prioritize my own projects now. I get to kind of like look around and see what's important to tackle and actually drive a little bit of what the brand is doing.
And so what would be an example of something that you feel is important to tackle when you're doing something like along those lines?
I'm trying to think of what I could talk about.
I know there's a lot of NDA stuff, yeah. But
well, okay, so here's an example. We have a lot of stuff coming up in the Magic the Gathering Netflix show. Mm-hmm. And there's so much stuff that a certain amount of it has to be handled by the production studio because we just don't have the workload to handle on our end. And so part of what my responsibilities are to determine what Wizards cares about enough that we give it a personal touch, and what we're happy having be developed externally. And then beyond that, from a franchise point of view, what becomes transmedia. So Netflix, as we talked about, is a separate kind of block of what Magic is from the card game, but there are commonalities in between them. There's a shared universe. There's kind of a shared language. And so I prioritize things that can strongly play in those shared spaces.
Wow, that seems like an intense amount of responsibility. I mean, like, did you have any idea that when you started doing the art for Magic that you would be, like, I say it again, but fast tracked into, like, it sounds like you are a serious gatekeeper to what is happening, and that's awesome.
Well, I wouldn't call it gatekeeping. I think it's more about, it's not like I'm saying not these other things. It's more about what are we most excited for coming. But in answer to the question of being fast tracked, I always try to plan for success, and both in work and in my personal career. I'm a big believer in doing the job that you're wanting to do rather than necessarily the job that you have at the moment. And having that kind of drive usually wins out. And it's what demonstrates the ability to have that kind of working autonomy.
And I'm going to mispronounce this, but it's a your website demon. How do I pronounce that?
Demony.
What does that mean?
So I've been using that handle since my early teens, and it's a bit of a deep cut if you want to get into it.
I wouldn't mind. I love a good deep cut.
So back in the early days, post 90s anime making it into the States. Do you remember Ghost in the Shell standalone complex?
I do.
Okay, so this was before there was an official subtitled version. There were a bunch of fan subs online. Most of them were allowed to be released by those studios because they weren't doing it themselves, and then eventually they'd get taken down when the studio made their own version. The first fan sub of Ghost in the Shell standalone complex, the first episode, the theme song, the intro song, is actually a Russian song that begins with the phrase "demons and angels are circling overhead." And demony in Russian is spelled, the romanization should be D-E-M-O-N-Y, but it was misromanized as D-E-M-O-N-U-I. And my background is I'm Filipino, Russian, Romanian, and there was
there you go.
There's a little bit of romance to the idea of an Asian show adopting a Russian word but misromanized, because that's essentially what my last name is too.
Yeah, I was going to say Lake Hurwitz is a name that when you read it, you're like, that is an interesting name. I was like, that it just stands out. It's just, there's not a lot of them.
No, very few. Yeah, my dad's family were Russian immigrants back in the early 1900s, and their family name was originally Gurevich, but was misromanized at Ellis Island and became Hurwitz.
Nice. So, and this is sort of like, but to sort of ask I'm scatterbraining a little bit, but so like when you're working on the artwork for the cards, and then at the same time you have all this additional stuff that you're doing, like, how does that work? I mean, when you're working with another art director and then you're sort of like directing others, how does that work? And as far as from when you didn't have that responsibility, when you do?
Well, I mean, that's the thing. I don't do a lot of card work anymore. The stuff that I'm doing, I've always been more of a concept artist than an illustrator. You'll find that a lot of Magic artists are also concept artists, but people that do both tend to fall slightly on one side or the other. I fall slightly on the concept art side, whereas a lot of my colleagues, Tyler Jacobson is a great example of a person who does both, but falls slightly more on the illustration side. And when there's a piece that's being made for a particular offering, like the Magic card game, and there's an art director who has a specific vision that they need to communicate and has that broader insight into what the product is doing, I will be art directed by that person. For my day-to-day duties, that's where I have a lot more autonomy.
So when you do like a concept push, what elements of it, I guess, or what elements of some of the things that you've involved with that you are the most proud of as far as what's come from, sort of seed to table, so to speak?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I guess it would be different depending on whether you're asking about concept push or the concept art I do as part of the day-to-day work.
Well, see, the thing is that my brain is very simple and I'm still not entirely clear. I mean, I have a basic idea, but it's a lot of concepts. So I mean, I guess I'd be asking both if you don't mind clarifying it for me and my idiotic self.
I'm happy to talk about it. I've been on two concept pushes directly, which were the as you pointed out, spaghetti. So that's Guilds of Ravnica, and I think the follow-up set was Ravnica Allegiance, if I'm remembering that right.
Mhm.
And then later I was on the push for Eldraine as well. I'm trying to remember what I made. There's a lot of cross communication between the artists on these pushes, and we hand things off to each other a lot. So what I remember was one of the first things I was able to nail down for Ravnica that landed really well were the kind of wrought iron weapons that the Rakdos use. I did a whole couple of pages on just wrought iron designs. I'm sure all of the artists that had to paint those were not very thankful for having to have something kind of complicated and twisted there, but it definitely won out in terms of finding an ornate aesthetic that was also kind of carnival-esque enough to be Rakdos.
Absolutely.
So that was big.
That kind of stuff I love. Is there like for example, also like behind me, Call to the Bloodline. I didn't realize it, but upon closer inspection, the interior and the dress that Olivia is wearing is almost like, I mean, it is identical, even down to the lighting as the Olivia Voldaren card. And so how does that decided? I mean, does somebody pick the dress and somebody just say like, here's how the mansion's done? I mean, how does that work?
It depends on how big of a set piece it's going to be. So if the mansion plays an extremely large role in a story moment or something like that, then it might be designed down to the floor plan, down to all of the individual elements. In this case, it was a little bit simpler. The original Olivia Voldaren piece was part of the world guide for this updated Innistrad set. And so I received that piece and they said, set it here. She looks the same, have her doing this other thing. And so it was very deliberate, but it wasn't the result of a huge concept push.
Really? Okay, cool. I mean, because it's one of my favorite pieces. And what would you say some of your favorite pieces are of the cards that you've done?
I'm actually very pleased with the ones that I've done since started to work as a concept artist at Wizards. Suspend, I'm actually really proud of. It's kind of weird in a way that I like to be with my work. The Modern Horizons sets kind of get to deviate from Magic's center a little bit more than normal. And so the art done for those cards gets to be a little bit more expressive and a little weirder. And that's typically what I like to do. I mean, that's one of the things that I actually view as the responsibility of a concept artist is to kind of push against the envelope. And we constantly are redefining what's normal and what's acceptable and what's interesting about a product and a story. And so Suspend in particular was a chance to do something a little off the beaten path.
What would you say like as far as like just from beginning to end, what as far as execution goes, were the smoothest of the cards? Like which ones just came out like they was like butter?
Yeah, that would be Hinterland Drake for sure. That one kind of flowed out because it's almost an abstract piece. You want to pull it up?
Yeah.
So Hinterland Drake, it's a view that you don't often get to see on Magic creatures. And one of the reasons that's allowed here where it wouldn't normally is because it's not that important of a creature in the set. It's not a legendary that you don't have to see the face. It doesn't have a particularly unique design. This was art directed by Mark Winters when he was still the AG down there. And because of all of those things, the piece itself becomes a little bit more abstract. And so all of the shape design is a little bit more pure. And I could worry a little bit less about the technical execution and just kind of get lost in making these beautiful swooping things going on.
Yeah, there's a sort of like it shows its size and the fact that it is at that interesting angle where it's the camera lens is behind it.
Yeah, and you almost never see that on Magic creatures.
That's true.
Whenever I can do it.
That's true. You don't actually ever see that, and you also I've noticed that you're very good at doing the architecture, the broad angle architecture, like from March of the Tomb or the console card. Is that something that you developed early when in school, or is that just something that, I mean, because I'm always curious, like when do they discover who has, sort of the forts for a certain thing?
So I can pull back the curtain a little bit there. The art directors for Magic are very familiar with the portfolios of everybody that works on the product. But typically that they don't have the time to continuously check in on those things. And so after the first couple of views of a portfolio, or after the first couple of times working with the person, they've gotten very good at understanding what people are really good at. And different art directors have different preferences in how they like to direct. And so different people will naturally fall into their kind of rosters and their Rolodexes. I have been friends with Cynthia Shepard for a really long time. And so between her and Dawn, who were kind of the two, and Mark Winters, they each developed different uses for my stuff. Another one that actually kind of happened fairly low friction, but one of my favorite pieces was Capital Punishment from I think Conspiracy Take the Crown.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That one is cool.
Yeah. So that was a Don Murren art direction, and initially I had approached it in a much looser way, but Dawn likes things tight, and so she had me kind of bring all of the details and increase the fidelity on that piece, and ultimately it ended up helping. And that's the value of a good art director, is they're able to kind of maintain that vision.
And so when you say tightness, you mean, and it was, were you saying like maybe the original versions were the strokes were looser, or something like that?
That's exactly it. Yeah, it was a little bit more expressive. I played a little fast and loose with how big my brush strokes were and how visible they were. And she made sure that those faces and those hands were reading very clearly.
What would you say the most difficult one was, or one of the most difficult ones was for you?
I'm trying to remember what it's called.
I have them all listed here, so if you knew, if it's a, give me a color.
Piece with a Vidalkin from Kaladesh, where he's crawling out of a manhole.
Let me see here. Fielded Aether Thief.
You'll notice, by the way, the reason I don't remember the titles is because I remember the development titles. I don't remember the final release titles, because sometimes they change after we paint them.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, that one was difficult because of how much had to go into it. It's a fight going on in the background in a very specific setting with a bunch of people in gold armor. Anytime you have metal in a scene that has to accurately reflect things, it gets harder. And then one of them is striking a shield and sparks are scattering all over the place. And the guy is crawling out of a manhole and looking at the viewer and has an ether tank strapped to his back. It's just a lot to put into one image.
And so was that something that you sort of, was that part of the direction, or were there certain elements that you put onto it, and then after you did it, you were like,
that was all in the brief. And here's the wacky part. And I think they did this on purpose. Shielded Ether Thief, I actually got at the same time as Hinterland Drake, because they're going to give me the smooth one so that I'm not overwhelmed completely by the complicated one.
Oh, that's considerate of them, actually. Yeah, I guess that's interesting. You'd know that. You would, I guess, being in that world, that's something you, as an art director, you'd have to consider. You can't give people the tough ones all the time. There's like really cool ones. I also like Manifold Key's just cool looking. It's one of the cool ones. And Hammer Dropper, I got it. Hammer Dropper, that one would be a poster that would be a hit at any gay club that is out there.
Anybody who's listening to this, that was a friend of mine who modeled for that. He lives up here. I'm not going to name names here just in case, but it was really funny to see all of the Reddit comments come in about how hot he was, and then being able to show this to him.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he's like all the digital catcalling, I guess, so to speak. Yeah, that's nice. It's always funny to like. I'm so fascinated by the fact that like some of these people are based off of stuff. And then so also, and what I'm curious about is your personal work is worlds different. than your magic stuff. And one of the pieces that I am like, I mean, it's awesome. I'm blown out by it. But the name of it, Fit to Burst.
Yeah.
What's happening there? What are we seeing? What was the inspiration behind that?
So yeah, there's a lot that went into that. I, for my personal work, I'm very interested in kind of the more surreal side of art. I think that's a fun dial to turn up or down.
Mm-hmm.
It's a piece that's really personal to me. All of the pieces in that series are really personal. I've had some kind of upsetting things happen in my life over the last 5 years, and then also some really joyous times too. And then when you combine those, you realize that like life is this kind of absurd dance, kind of vivid and dreamlike at the same time. It feels so real, but then very ephemeral. You kind of can't grasp onto it easily. And so all of my personal work these days kind of revolves around those themes, kind of archetypal storytelling and more kind of dreamlike spaces and sort of the modern expression of what magic, not Magic the Gathering, but magic like sorcery feels like to people. Like what does it mean when we're talking about magic and culture?
There's and your use of a the fluorescence is so different than what you usually see. Like it's let me see this one I'm looking at here. I believe I'm gonna mispronounce it. Gwen.
Oh yeah, that character is from a D&D campaign I'm playing in. So we were all doing character art of our characters.
But it's cool because it seems like your personal stuff has a little bit, not just the brighter colors, but it has a flamboyance to it that's really just distinct. It's interesting. And then the one that I also really do find cool is it's Lake Lair. I'm just butchering the names of it, but it's the three characters, Lake Lalarium.
Oh, Lalarium.
Yeah.
That's been something I've been working on for a long time.
So is that a comic or what is it?
No, so those are so yeah, let's get into this. They're not people. They're kind of archetypal characters, sort of like when you they're all beings I've met in dreams and found ways to express. And if you think about it, like the people you meet in your dreams, they're not really characters very much. They're kind of more abstract than that.
Right.
So like I don't think of those three as having like personalities, but they have roles to play for me. And I've introduced them to many of my friends and partners, whether professional or personal. And we've used them as metaphors for a variety of things, like the girl in the red dress kind of represents this spirit of sort of a little bit of vengeful challenger. It's like the person that knows they're going to beat you and tells you to compete anyway. And then the one in the middle, that's you'll see that pop up a lot in my work. That's the black hairy mask that we pull over our faces to look scary so that people won't bother us. And the character on the right there is the things we carry around with us to traverse the wasteland.
So it seems like maybe you kind of come from a little bit of a school of background, maybe like of Joseph Campbell, where like where the dreams are more like, what did he say? That he said that dreams are private myths and myths are public dreams.
So here's an interesting thing. I've read a fair amount of Campbell, but I actually don't subscribe to his writings as much anymore. I don't know how familiar people are with this, but out of the Jungian disciplines, there were a lot of other movements that were spawned. And one of those more recently are the mythopoets. And they have their problems for sure. And so I'm not like a hardline mythopoet student or anything like that, but their literary analysis of fantasy aligning with psychology is interesting. Are you familiar with like Bruno Bettelheim, who also is a problem? He's also a very problematic person. But
everybody has their issues. You know what I mean? It's you can't. You kind of have to sort of cherry pick the wisdom from the
So
speed.
between them, Marion Woodman.
I
And
love her. Yeah.
yeah, and there's a whole bunch of people that are kind of in this space of understanding magic as culture and kind of the process by which we communicate meaning to one another. I'm a student of philosophy as well. I'm going through a whole bunch of semiotics stuff, and all of the texts that we engage with and all of the kind of more mythological experiences we engage with, you can look at them through this kind of mythological thinking lens. It's a way of talking about the world. It's less about being a student of one person's way of thinking and more about learning to engage with the stories that we tell each other as real things in real ways. And I could go off on this forever, but
I love it. I mean, I can't believe you said Marion Woodman. I mean, you're the first person besides Tori Amos who I've heard, because that's who I learned about her from, and Holding the Tension of the Opposites. And I literally bought the tape because that's the only thing you could get of that. But yeah, go on, as you're saying.
So I think that there's a desire for a lot of people to make that about the other world. Are you familiar with like naturalism? So a lot of people see those as incompatible views. The naturalistic view that there is only one world and that all of our experience is tied to that world seems incompatible to many people, to the idea that there is a mythological world. But there's another kind of practice that I've been reading into, which is Sean Carroll's Poetic Naturalism, which is about how emergent systems that are naturalistic are still resultant from finer grained systems. So the classic example is like temperature is not like a property of quantum particles, but it's an emergent property that happens when you look at quantum particles in aggregate. And so similarly, like what we're talking about when we talk about poetry, and especially poetic naturalism, and especially mythopoetry, it's what is the best language that we can use to describe the things that we need to be able to describe to understand ourselves and the world around us.
And so are you creating your own mythopoetry as well as, do you do that and then create, say, a piece of art that goes in conjunction with it?
Sort of. So I don't think it's a thing that you can do for yourself. Like there's an amount of like personal practice and sorcery that people can engage in. And I have to offer the disclaimer, like I believe that there is one world, the naturalistic world. I just believe that there are these other ways of engaging with it. I'm not off the deep end with woo stuff.
Right. It's like
a useful way to engage.
You can, there's alternate realities in a sense. Like if somebody eats that mushroom and it disagrees with you, then, you're going to be seeing a different world than.
Yeah, that's a good example. It's like you have an altered state of perception, but that doesn't mean that your experiences, it doesn't mean that a car isn't a car. It doesn't mean that a person isn't a person. It just means that they mean something different to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep, so, exactly.
So in terms of like crafting my own mythologies, I look at it more like I'm finding other ways to communicate mythologies with people. And I look at it less like inventing and more like being a conduit. It's where the term genius comes from. It means from without. And it's all of the context of a life being expressed in a way.
Yeah. Okay. It's fascinating stuff. Like also another piece that I am curious, Raw and Inspira too. It's shocking. It's beautiful. I wonder. I don't want to pry, but I mean, it seems like a lot of these pieces. I mean, like you were saying, there's maybe some events that were traumatic or that were rough that they came from. But what was that piece? I mean, I can tell you my interpretation of it, but I am curious to know what your intentions were when making it.
So you're dancing around a subject that I think is really interesting, which is like how much does it matter what the author of a work meant by the work?
And I think that it matters, but I also think that it does not. When knowing what a creative person is making, what their intentions were, I do not believe it robs away from the person's who experiences it, because you're going to experience the work, right, for the first time on your own. I saw your painting first. I didn't get to talk to you prior to. It would be a bad thing if you said, this is what it's about before anybody could see it and then revealed it, right? But I think that they can coexist. I really do.
Yeah, I think that the decision to know what the author's intent was has to be a really personal one. So I'm happy to share it with you and with anybody else who's listening. But I'm a strong believer in like any artwork that gets experienced is co-created by the author and the audience.
Mhm.
It's a dialogue. The word medium means thing that comes between. And so if the medium of communication for, say, Magic or D&D between the designers and writers and the players is the source books or the card game, then between the creator and the player, you've created something new. And there's an amount of ownership that both actors have over whatever the product is. So I would find it very interesting to hear what your read of the pieces before I tell you where it came from.
Well, I mean, so okay, I can give you my general take, but what I was sort of viewing from it was, this may sound strange, but I sort of got the notion of the loss of a baby.
Hmm.
That's what I got. I mean, there was so much the blood in the sea, but yet the blood sort of coming. I mean, it seems like it's blood, but it's, maybe just some sort of protoplasm coming out of her forehead. It's I feel like it's got elements of the menstruation going on. So that was my initial take. I sort of saw it was a woman going through some sort of loss. She's in
Hmm.
the ocean alone. She's part of this boat. She's isolated, but yet there's this thing happening that is incredibly like world changing to her. That was my take.
Yeah, I think the idea of a world-changing thing is correct. Is basically what I was aiming for. So I can tell you and the listeners that there was no miscarriage in my life. Thank goodness.
That's good. That's
And
good.
I wouldn't say that it revolved even around a single traumatic event. And that's sort of what I mean by how I'm exploring archetype in sort of these kind of vivid liminal spaces. I'm looking for what's the image that can act as a bit of a catch-all reflection to those. So I'm drawing on a disparate set of my own experiences to kind of create that side of things. From a traditional Western mythological viewpoint, the boat, the blanket, the fish are all classic symbols of kind of delving within oneself and discovering treasure. And so
Okay.
there's an element that's present in the piece of beauty out of introspection, but it comes out explosively, and that's what inspiration is.
What I also find very fascinating too is that you, at least in these two particular pieces, Fit to Burst and uh, the Asper, uh, is that you have women as the protagonists,
Mm.
which I wonder is what is the decision for that? Is that a way that you're able to sort of, I guess, maybe sort of separate yourself from it? I mean, I too, I too tend to, like, when I see a film, I tend to be inclined to like want to see the female perspective just personally. So I found that very interesting. Was there a reason behind that?
Well, I'll say I'm going to answer that question with something a little cryptic, maybe.
Sure.
Um,
I mean,
I
you're an
think,
artist. It's got to happen.
yeah, I think it's really interesting that you think they're protagonists.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. I don't I don't make those pieces um, with the idea that the audience takes the point of view of anyone that's in it. It's
Hmm.
there are certainly people in my personal work that are myself, but I don't expect other people to place themselves into my shoes the same way. Um, It's sort of like when you're using archetypes, you're creating vehicles for people to find what energy is active within them at the time. So, I mean, I'll share this with you. I think it's perfectly accurate to read Fit to Burst as having a female protagonist. But when I was making it, I was more in the mindset of the baby.
Really?
Yeah.
See, now I kind of got a little bit, I guess, because of like I kind of got a little bit of a Kali vibe, like like the mother, I mean, destruction kind of thing. That was my take from it. But then there is sort of like a comical sort of relief to it. I mean, it's definitely, I could see it definitely frightening people who are not, I guess, ready to see that kind of image. But my first thoughts were not that this woman was like loathsome, but I do find it fascinating that you were putting yourself in the baby standpoint, because I assumed that.
That's also an interesting read, because you just said you wouldn't have viewed her as loathsome, but I didn't say that. I don't think that I view her as that either.
I think that, well, I wouldn't, but I do believe that. I think that if you showed this to, say, maybe a group of people in like middle America, the first thought would be, oh my God, she murdered her baby. You know what I'm saying? Like, and that's more along the lines of what I meant, which is not the intention. Obviously, that's not what's happening, but I could see people seeing that, because a lot of people just are sort of, they are linear in that kind of way.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's also the danger of having work that's thematic rather than narrative. Humans are really hungry for narratives. We like to see ourselves in other people's stories. And so when confronted by work that's kind of more thematic and more kind of abstract in what it's saying, I think people will naturally find the narrative that's most relevant to them, if the themes are relevant.
I would agree. I'm seeing, this is why I always find it fascinating to find out what the intention of the artist is, because it to me, it makes it even more of a mysterious experience when you're viewing art. And then now looking back on this conversation, I can see why you had fun doing Suspend, because Suspend sort of allowed you to sort of dip into those elements that it seems like you're more, at least like it's sort of like your home plane of where you are creatively, and that makes sense, and it's really cool stuff. I mean, people should check it out, and I will definitely be posting it. And before I let you go, I wanted to know, do you have anything that you're working on personally that you are ready to talk about?
So you're finding me kind of at an interesting time. The work I'm doing with the Wizards franchise team, we're working on a ton of great stuff, and a lot of those things I've been able to really express myself in, sort of in the way that I kind of contextualize my experience as part of broader culture. Like, you're not going to see anything like my personal work coming up in D&D or Magic like that, but I'm getting to kind of flex the same kind of storytelling perspective and the same kind of mythological thinking. And because of that, I think this is the job that, when concept artists are coming up through school, they kind of promise you that there's a promise of what concept art can be, that you just kind of get to draw cool stuff all day and kind of write the thing. And right now, I'm getting to do that. Not a lot of concept art jobs actually are that. And right now I'm getting to do that a lot. So while right now I don't have any personal projects that are upcoming, I'm not done with them. So I would expect more before too long.
Awesome. And I know that you can't give away any like details, but are you doing any upcoming cards for any upcoming sets? Are you going to be contributing with that for any of the upcoming sets?
It's unlikely. So the direction that the card game is taking in terms of the volume of product, which is great. It's great for the game to have a lot of amazing things coming out, and it's great to have a multitude of creative expression and a lot of people working on it. I don't feel as attached to it personally. And so I get to experience it sort of more as an audience member than I have over the last 6 or 7 years. And that's been a real joy to engage with. Like, it's funny. The first time I encountered Magic, I was 8 years old, and my dad had got me, I think, like some Ice Age 4th edition stuff.
Wow.
And we played with the local game store. This was back in Maryland, where I was growing up. And then we moved. And after we moved, I didn't play for a while, but then made some friends in high school who all played. And so I got back into it, and then went pretty deep on the game. And then around 2010, just when I was exiting school, or maybe it was before that, I remember playing the game. And so when I was young, that mythology was already a part of my life. Both of my parents were students of anthropology, and while they had their own careers, my dad worked at NOAA for the government doing environmental work, and my mom did like outreach programs.
Wow.
It meant that magic to me, when I was young, what it were tokens of mythology that could be manipulated. And I remember an experience around 2009, 2010, when I was playing with one of my high school friends, and all of a sudden, I didn't feel like a wizard casting spells. I felt like just a guy playing a card game, and it just killed the game for me. Like, so I stopped playing, and I stopped playing until 5 years later. I started working on the game because, I still had a love for the product as a product and what it had been for me this whole time in my life. And a lot of my friends were working on it. And artists receive contributor copies of the products that they work on. So every artist who's made, like anybody who's made a card for a set gets a copy of, or they get a booster box,
Mhm.
one of the things. And because it's essentially the same as like it's like the artist proofs, it's just a contributor copy. And so I had all of these magic cards lying around, and I was like, well, I'm gonna play with them. What else am I gonna do? And I learned to really love it as a game instead of a mythology token from that point forward.
Interesting.
And so now, as the game becomes more diverse in its expression, I have these different ways of engaging with it. And because of all that, all put together, I'm sort of less interested in doing card art compared to what it means to take those bits of mythology and turn them into the new myths. I mean, that's what we're doing on franchise, right? We are taking the mythology of Magic and making sure it becomes cultural mythology. That's what Portal did with all of their superheroes. They took comic books and turned them into mythology. So
and it certainly has the capacity to do that too. I mean, it's exciting.
Yeah, Magic is a really great way to connect people to people. It's one of the biggest strengths that have, despite all of the contenders that have tried to take a bite of Magic's pie, like Hearthstone or Runeterra or anything like that. I mean, they're great games too, but Magic has a romance to it and a way of bringing people together that the other games just haven't done yet.
Mm-hmm. And I guess one last question before I go. If you had to name like an example of like a truly mythological piece of magic art from the game that moved you most, what would be an example of that?
That's a good question. I got to look at my catalog now. So I think I've done what, like 67, 70, something like that cards?
Around that. Yeah, it says here, let me see.
I'm trying to remember what they were even now.
It says here 55, but that's just the gatherer. There could be more because sometimes I leave out, like tokens and whatnot. And
I think probably the most mythologically relevant piece of artwork I've done for Magic. It's 2 pieces.
Okay.
Well, three. So the 3 are the Flame of Kel, which is explicitly mythological. All of the sagas kind of fall into that category. It's like when you look at it, you should kind of get a sense of how it's also mythology of your own life.
Right.
And then Suspend, of course, because it was already playing in that space. And then I'm sure that this is kind of a weird answer, but Carbonize.
That's not weird. It's not weird at all. It's a fascinating piece.
it's kind of iconic in a way that not a lot of Magic cards get to be. And part of that is like the result of there being a limited number of iconic concepts that can go into fantasy before you run that well dry. I think that the design team very intelligently has reserved names like Silence and Jump and Carbonize, anything like that, or Disintegrate, whatever you want, whether it's classic or modern, Suspend, even. All of those iconic cards, you're going to reserve those for things that feel more ubiquitous and kind of timeless. And anytime we get to work on that stuff is awesome. Actually, I'll tell you, my favorite piece of Magic art, not one of mine, is Adam Rex's Terror. It's
oh my God, I've talked to him about that. That piece is insane.
It's so good, so good, and it's so exactly in that space of kind of mythologically connecting people to culture.
I mean, I asked him, I said, would that have, when you did that, I was like, did that take its toll on you when you were working on that? And he said that it kind of did. I can't imagine that it didn't. It's absolutely, I mean, it's terror. It's you look at it and you're like, okay, yeah, that's it. That's terror.
I mean, that's all of these ones that I just named are exactly that. Like the Flame of Keld is sort of the Magic the Gathering's telling of the Prometheus story. And everybody knows at some way deep in their hearts what it means to bring fire down from the mountain.
Right. And yeah.
Suspend also, everybody knows what it feels like to be a soldier out of time displaced. And Carbonize, everybody knows what it's like to be flash incinerated and not to be able to do anything about it, but still fighting through it all the same.
Right. It's brutal, but it is something. It is an experience, and that's what's great. That's what's great about Magic, is that ability to sort of take those experiences and make them into these fantastic images and ideas. And I guess one final question, because I do want to know some of the characters in the game that you were involved with. Would you be able to tell a little bit more about some of the ones that you had your hands in, as far as bringing them to the final product?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few that are coming up that I won't talk about. The Netflix series is going to have its own cast, and I got to work on a fair few in there that I'm hoping, but truly believe that they will be very popular. I think that when you see them coming down, everybody's going to get super hyped.
That's
but
exciting.
Beyond that, in the time that I was working as a staff artist for the franchise team, some responsibilities have shifted around since this, and so this isn't really something that my team is handling so much anymore. But I ended up doing the final designs, though not the illustrations. The illustrations are credited appropriately for Tyvar Kell.
Okay.
And for Luca.
Fascinating. So,
and I also designed his tiger bat.
So that's cool. Okay, see, so that's the kind of stuff I wonder. Yeah, now Tyvar Kell, that's like, so you sort of like, you sort of do. I don't know if are you allowed to release any of the sketches that you've done of that kind of stuff? Is that stuff something that is allowed to be shared in the public, or is that something that is kept on lockdown?
It's allowed. I'm just lazy about asking for approval and posting things.
I gotcha.
So at some point they'll go up online. I have the original design work for Luca and Tyvar. The execution on the cards is pretty consistent with what the design ended up being, though. So you've seen those. You kind of know what I put into it already. There's a little bit of extra stuff, and it's more like a model sheet than it is, the final illustration. There were a few others too. So there's some Planeswalker work that's been done that will eventually show up in various places. I was there I didn't end up doing the visual part of this, but I did a bunch of the narrative design for Basri Ket too, a little ways back.
Narrative design meaning his background, or is that what that means?
Right. So like I'll talk a little bit about this. Basri started off as we had a missing spot in the lineup of Planeswalkers that people could use for a white aligned Planeswalker.
Right.
So we spent kind of a long time tooling around with different ideas of what that mono white planeswalker could be that eventually became Bosriket. And so while I didn't do the design work, I was deeply involved in all those conversations. Like, what were his powers? Where did he come from? Like, there was a time where he might have been from a plane that wasn't Amonkhet, but ultimately this was the best final decision to make.
Right. I mean, Amonkhet needs to have a couple of wins. I mean, poor Amonkhet. It's been screwed over. Like,
I mean, you say that, but it's still one of the most popular planes we've done.
Oh, I mean, in a sense that just what happened to it, it was so devastated.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's the thing I love about him is he's so optimistic.
Yeah, exactly. Like, he's still like all about Oketra, and it's just like after the devastation, no pun intended, that happened to Amonkhet, it's nice to see them have a win, you know?
Yeah. And that's actually one of the things I love about working at Wizards. So I was also very deeply involved with the development of Nico Eris.
Mm-hmm.
The final design, I did some final touch-ups, but the character designer for that was Sarah Winters.
Right.
And but it was a really like collaborative process, and we were working side by side on that one. And that's sort of what I mean. Like, Wizards is a space where when we want to drive to make something happen, it happens. And when we're pushing for representation, it's going to happen, and we want to tell the best story we can.
Mm-hmm. And it's also, I think, too, what people need to understand is that a lot of times with the amount of stuff that's coming out, these stories will unveil themselves in time. It's a lot easier when you just had like Urza and then his brother, and those are the only two people that you need to really focus on. Now we've got a large cast of characters, and I'm interested to see where the story goes and understand that you're not going to get the novel of the person like released as the time they make their card debut. There's stuff in the works, right? That's years ahead, and that you guys got up your sleeves that's coming.
All of the Netflix stuff is going to be the characters in a way that we've never seen them before. Like, you've never gotten to spend time and just hear them talk. Even in the novels, it's not the same as like seeing them move.
That's so cool. I mean, like the lore, the Vorthos in me is just like I crap my pants a little bit just now, just a bit. It couldn't be helped.
Yeah, it's going to be a wild time. Wizards is poised for really great stuff.
And when is that expected to be released again?
Don't believe it's publicly been announced yet.
It hasn't been announced yet. Okay, well, I mean, I know we're on pins and needles. And well, that's all I have for you now. But is there anything else anything else that you'd like to add as far as those like cool stories? I love these kind of tidbits. It's difficult to know how to ask it because I never know who's involved with what, and you're a different sort of breed of interview than what I usually do with just when I'm interviewing, say, just the people who do the regular, art is for the cards.
Yeah, I guess the only other thing that I'd add is I am deeply connected to a lot of the people you've already interviewed. I went through your channel and saw the list of names, and I was like, oh, this is how I know this is legit, because literally all of my friends have done this. Like people that I know and work with regularly that I have hired to do work for our team. They seem to have a great time with it, and the artist community is very tightly knit.
Yes,
art as a profession, it's pretty small in terms of who does it, and the fact that so many amazing artists have both made their careers and continue to engage with the expression that is Wizards is a testament to the staying power and the cultural relevance of all the products that we're making.
Absolutely. I mean, if you just take a look at Spectrum, which I saw you in it, I saw your Spectrum. Yeah, I was like, that's when I was like, pardon me?
Which one? I've had a few pieces.
The one that I got was, I believe, the Spectrum 26 book. It was a Dungeons and Dragons piece that featured you. But there's been a few of them, but I only bought the one because I was at Barnes and Noble and I saw it and I was like, why did I not know this was a thing?
I've had, I think, 3 D&D pieces in Spectrum. Which one was it?
Okay. I have it right here. It is on page 58.
While you're looking that up, I'll just mention this. D&D work is kind of interesting in that it actually gets to play in those mythological spaces a little bit more than Magic does. Because Magic has this need for specificity in all of the cards. Like every card has to be identifiable as a different card from the others. Where D&D work, the stuff that's in the source books, it's really giving you the tools to tell your own stories. And that's essentially an archetype. We're describing archetypes that people are going to take and tell stories with. And so it's automatically going to play in that mythological space a little bit more. And I love working on D&D. Love it.
So yours is, and I'm going to butcher it again, Sihugan Baron's Throne.
Oh yeah. I don't know how that's supposed to be pronounced. But yeah, that was a fun one.
Yeah, that's and it's incredible, the digital like stuff. The amount of detail that you guys are able to pull off. I mean, I watched that, some of the I guess you were teaching a class at an Atelier school, and it was just mind-blowing to hear the technique that goes into it. And I think that the things you guys are doing is just really cool. But like what you were saying with Magic, Dungeons and Dragons, you look at the artwork in the Spectrum, and it's a good chunk of it is from Wizards of the Coast, and it is very much the way I would equate sort of like the patrons who in the medieval times would let the Michelangelos have free reign to do what they need to do. You guys are sort of the modern day versions of that, and those are the way that the cards are sort of like being immortalized. The artwork is immortalized.
Wizards does not have any kind of partnership with Spectrum. The art's just that good.
No, exactly. That's what I'm saying. It's like it's exactly. It just you guys get the the cream of the crop, and it just shows up, and it's nice to see that. It's like, oh yeah, represent.
Wizards is a goal for a lot of students who will be tomorrow's cream of the crop, the top tier artists.
And that's what's exciting about it. That's what's exciting about it with each new set and each new name that comes up on the roster. I'm like, okay, what's going to be coming next? Because at one point in time, these names like Magali were it was a debut of hers, and then these people become like just sort of epic, and not sort of, just epic, and it's fascinating. It is truly fascinating, and thank you so much for letting me get a little behind the scenes look from an alternate angle.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Well, how did you like Lake? Like Lake. Say that 3 times fast. Like Lake, like Lake, like Lake. Also, how excited is everybody about the Netflix show? I wish I could see it now, but patience is a virtue that I do not have. So I'm going to shorten my wait time by taking a nap. Right now.